Support this podcast via our Patreon and get more writerly goodness. Visit patreon.com/nanocast to join up.
Welcome to NaNoWriMo Every Month. My name is J. Daniel Sawyer. I'm the author of some 20 books, 34 short stories, and numerous articles and other things, and I am your guide on this journey to use NaNoWriMo to level up to professional output levels. Welcome to The Questions, Episode 12, and oh boy, have you guys sent in a bunch of new questions. This will keep me going for a while. Keep sending the questions in, because I will run out of these, and then we'll have a pause again unless more questions have come in. But I've got enough at least for 10 straight days, might be able to stretch it out to 14, so I'm sitting down to record them all now. Now, our first question is from Melissa, who asks, I've started to create an author brand under my pen name Renee Lovins, but I've published 2 romances under that name, and the series I'm working on is sci-fi without a romance subplot. Can I still publish under that name, or will I be shooting myself in the foot if I don't create another name for my non-romance stuff? Well, Melissa, or Renee, you've stumbled into one of the weirdest little aspects of the new world. It used to be that publishers would demand you do different genres under different pen names to avoid confusion, to make marketing easier, to allow them to claim one particular one of your names as their in-house name, or any number of other reasons. And back then, the series, the genre, and sometimes, at least in the case of boutique houses like Bain, the publishing house were the brand that customers identified with. Nowadays, things are a little different. Nowadays, it's really the author that people seem to be identifying with for almost everything except for romance, which has a very sophisticated culture in its fan base that tends to be much more series loyal. There's a couple of different ways you can tackle this. The first is that you can start a second name and set up different sort of silos under your publishing house. Because once you start publishing, you've become a publisher, and eventually you'll be releasing enough material over the course of your career to be a publishing house, so it's better to start acting like one sooner rather than later. The advantages to having more than one name under your publishing house silo are that it makes it a little easier to get taken seriously in certain business contexts if you're publishing other authors than just you, particularly if you're publishing under the same name that you're doing business under. And it does help with discrete branding in radically different genres. On the other hand, the fewer books you have out under a given name, the less discoverable that name is. And if you're going to be building 2 or more separate names, each of those names has its own career. And so you're looking at probably a longer ramp-up between you and profitability. Now, you may already be dealing with this problem if you, like me, write scattershot across a number of genres. If you're a multi-genre author, it's going to take longer for you to build your fan base, because your core fan base are going to be those people who will read anything that you write. They're the people who fall in love with your voice. They don't just read you because you're their favorite author in genre X. And it's easier to find true fans like that if you're writing in a narrow niche than if you're writing all over the place. I write all over the place. I accepted a few years ago that it was going to take a good while for me to build a career that paid well enough, long-term enough, that I would be able to stop, for example, taking outside clients at my production studio. I live off my outside clients at my production studio, and I would love to be able to, shake their hands and say thank you for doing business, but I now have enough passive income that I can write completely full-time. I'm not there yet, but eventually I will get there, and each year I get a little closer. But that's one of the prices that I pay for being a multi-genre author. On the other hand, if I was a single-genre author, the price I'd pay would be psychological. I would start to go nuts writing within the constraints of a single genre. I would get bored, my writing would go stale, and my career might not be as long. That's because of how I'm wired psychologically. If you are the kind of person who is pushed to write in various genres, you're going to have a longer career build than someone who writes in a narrow niche. Or someone who writes in a narrow niche and then branches out, like, say, Stephen King. Stephen King started his career in a very narrow niche, and over the years he's branched out. He doesn't write horror anymore. He writes sometimes horror, but frequently he writes crime fiction or family sagas with a tinge of magical realism or literary fiction or, a bunch of different cross genres and subgenres that don't really have enough of a following to sustain a career on that genre. But it sustained Stephen King's career because Stephen King is Stephen King, and he's made people fall in love with his voice, and he did it by starting narrow and then branching out. And that's partly due to his natural development as a writer. In the early years, he was drawn particularly toward supernatural horror and toward crime fiction, and that's where he made his bones early on, and then he branched out as he grew older and his interests diversified. And that's one way to do it. But if that's not the way your psychology is pushing you, you shouldn't try to do that. You should follow the way you're wired, because you'll be most productive that way, and you'll grow fastest as an artist that way. So, all of that's a big long aside, getting back around to the main thing. If you're a multi-genre author, are you going to build two careers side by side under different names, or are you going to build a single career under one name? Either way, the build will take longer than the niche writer. On the other hand, if you have one name, the takeoff curve, once you finally get traction, will be a lot faster because the true fans that you adopt will have many more books to choose from. They will have a bigger backlist to work through. You'll get more sales, more readers, more evangelism once you pass sort of the knee of that curve. Whereas if you've got two niche careers or two narrower careers, you're less likely to get intense cross-pollination between them. They will remain silos as long as you keep them under separate names. Eventually, you may decide to wipe one out and merge them together. Now, that said, doing it under two names does offer some advantages. For example, it lets people know exactly what to expect out of your books, and readers love to know what to expect when they pick up a book. They like to be surprised, but they don't really like to be shocked. Or maybe I should say they like to be surprised within the confines of the expectations that were set down by seeing your name on the cover, the artwork, the title, the back of book blurb, all that sort of stuff. And when you have two separate names, that removes a whole level of differentiation you need to do with regards to the artwork and the font design and the way you write your cover copy that you would otherwise have to do if you're a single writer writing in multiple genres. Now, for me personally, and this has been something I've toyed with a lot, I've actually got 3 really cool pen names that I've been waiting for an opportunity to use because they just sound so damn cool. But every time I get a book that sort of fits under one of those pen names it's supposed to be, I look at my catalog and I look at that non-existent author's lack of a catalog, and I say, this book, it really does fit with my other stuff. It's going to go over here. So I've wound up going for one name across the whole field. On the other hand, that means there are about 3 books that I haven't released. And those I may wind up releasing under a pen name because they are so different from everything I do that it really is as if a different person wrote them. And the reason is I wrote them at a different time in my life when I had a different worldview, different priorities, a different voice. And despite the fact that they were written very early on in my writing career, they're the pieces that I accidentally did well. Everyone's got those early in their career. There'll be a short story or a book or a screenplay that you wrote and you sort of lucked into doing everything right because you were having fun and relaxing and you had no idea what you did right, and the next 15 things you did completely sucked. These are those sorts of things for me. And if I ever release those, they will probably go out under a name that I'm not publicly associated with because they won't work for my fans. They're so different that putting my name on the cover would almost be a lie. That said, in the current cultural climate, there is a line you may want to think about respecting when it comes to what name you should publish under. If you're writing children's stories on the one hand, and by children's stories I mean Dr. Seuss stories, and maybe middle grade, I don't mean YA. And hardcore pornographic erotica on the other hand, you may at least want to use your initials for one of those instead of the full name. Purely because you don't want a parent picking up one of your porn books for their kid and being really upset that their kid got The Cock of the Walk instead of The Cat in the Hat, for example. If you're doing extremely adult stuff and very young stuff at the same time, you're going to want to differentiate the name. You may want Dr. Seuss for the kids' stuff and Theodore Geisel for the older stuff, which is what Dr. Seuss did, up until late in his career when he started writing Dr. Seuss-style books for teenagers. Or you may want to, in my case, for example, do J.D. Sawyer or J.D. or something for the kids' books and J. Daniel Sawyer for the adult books. It doesn't matter that people know that they're the same person. What matters is that the impulse buyer will not accidentally buy something for their children that is completely not what they're expecting. And that's the one boundary you used to really want to respect. I suppose the other one is if you're writing Christian fiction and seriously, deeply occultic, satanic fiction. That might also be a problem, but that's a lot less of a line than it used to be. There used to be a bunch of other lines, like Christian fiction and erotica. Well, that line's gone now with the rise of the evangelical erotica industry. And yes, there is one. It's been fascinating to watch. You didn't want to write horror and romance under the same name for the same kinds of reasons. You didn't want to write Christian fiction and horror under the same name for that kind of reason. And then came Frank Peretti and wrote Christian horror fiction, and that blew that distinction out of the water. The last real line left is the line between hardcore erotica and children's books, and that's really a pragmatic line rather than a cultural taboo line. And that one's worth respecting. But other than that, I think in the long run, the short run's a different story, but I think in the long run you will probably be better served by putting everything out under one name and differentiating very well from the cover level down instead of the name level down. At least that's the strategy that I've decided on. But there's, like I've said, good reasons to do things the other way. So one size doesn't fit all. It's a very individual decision. Good luck to you. I hope it helps. And that's it for this one. So I'll see you tomorrow. NaNoWriMo Every Month is written and presented by J. Daniel Sawyer and produced by Artistic Whispers Productions. Visit our website at NaNoWriMoEveryMonth.com and leave a tip in the tip jar to support this podcast. NaNoWriMo Every Month is copyright 2015 by J. Daniel Sawyer and Artistic Whispers Productions and released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license.